Hi, this is Graham Allen back with a different video. Today I'm going to be talking about Carl Palmer, drummer with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and his contribution to progressive rock drumming and rock drumming world, progressive rock drumming world. The reason I'm doing this now is in 2020 there was a planned 50th anniversary Emerson, Lake and Palmer convention to be held in Birmingham. It was organised predominantly by Tom Zackerley of a tribute band called Noddy's Puncture, and he'd been involved in 1995, which was the 25th anniversary convention. It was well attended by people from all over the world. It was an excellent event, and so there was a plan for a 50th anniversary for Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I'd offered up a kind of seminar stroke talk about Carl Palmer's contribution to drumming, the sort of great drum moments in his career, particularly relating to ELP, going through the different albums and his sort of highlights, that kind of thing, talking a little bit about his style as well. And so what I'm going to do is probably break this down into three parts, keep it briefer than the original kind of 40-minute, 45-minute talk stroke seminar. And what I want to do is start off with this album, which people will know. It's The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. And the reason I mention this is because Carl Palmer joined The Crazy World of Arthur Brown in 1968, just after they'd had the hit Fire, to tour with them. Now, it's debated whether he actually plays on this album on some of the tracks. It's highly likely he doesn't actually. People aren't sure. The various credits have not been kept accurately, and there were probably three drummers, or at least two drummers, used on here. One is John Heisman, who went on to Colosseum, and the other is probably John Marshall, who is a session drummer. Carl thinks he might have been on some of the unreleased or B-sides, because there were singles from this, most notably Fire, of course, which got to number one in 1968 and was a massive hit for The Crazy World of Arthur Brown. So Carl Palmer went off and toured the States with Arthur Brown, and the big significant other was Vincent Crane on organ, and who was doing a lot of the arrangements of the sound structures used. I think the other thing to note about this is Carl was at the back of the stage, if you like, on drums, but Arthur Brown was out front being very, very theatrical. And I think, as Carl has said, the theatrics of Arthur Brown, I think probably in some ways influenced him in some of his stage performances later on. He's a very theatrical drummer. We'll talk a bit about that in due course. Because of personality problems, Arthur Brown being fairly unpredictable on this tour in terms of his behaviour, basically Carl Palmer and Vincent Crane aborted the tour, got on a plane together, and said that they were going to put together a band when they got back to the UK. They did put a band together, and it's this album. It's Atomic Rooster's debut album on B&C Records, and this, I think, is an exceptionally good album. It's got heavy overtones to it. It's almost like sort of heavy metal in its own way, but with an organ taking the lead. So if you think about somebody like John Lord with Deep Purple, that kind of very heavy grinding sound, Vincent Crane is like that on here. He also plays piano. It's a very quite a dark album. It's slightly bluesy at times, very progressive at times. It has some wonderful orchestrations on a track called Winter. Carl Palmer plays glockenspiel on that, and again, that that's an indication of what he would go on to do. I think this is a great sort of representation of his drumming. It's fiery, it's very quick at times, it's based a lot around the snare, his fierce snare technique. It has a studio drum solo on it, a track called Decline and Fall, which is kicked into the solo by a kind of 6/8 groove that he plays on the snare drum with the snare knocked off, so a very lively bouncing rhythm, and that kicks him into his solo. And that again is a sort of a theme going ahead, that he would use the kind of the bars in the music before the solo to kind of kick him into the solo. He's not a guy who plays over a vamp, keeps something going. He just kind of belts into the solo. That's his trademark. A bit like Buddy Rich, who of course was a big fan of Carl, and Carl was a big fan of Buddy. This is kind of like, you can see the influence of Buddy Rich in his playing on this album. I think it's really important in anyone wanting to check out his history. The drums are really beautifully recorded. There's some very busy single bass drum work on here. The single bass drum comes through very well, but it's the snare that really leaps out at you, this kind of incredibly fiery, fast snare drum. So there's Carl, probably aged 19 here on this. This was released in 1970, so he'd have been 20. The album did quite well, and was, it was a debut album that promised much, really. So Carl must have really thought, I've stamped my mark all over this album. There's a little quote that I just want to mention, and it was when I was up in a drum shop in Liverpool in the UK, and there was actually a poster on the wall of Carl Palmer advertising Gretsch drums, and I really wanted the poster. And it was quite a few years later, and I persuaded the guy, can I take the poster? And he just said, go on then. And he said, actually, I remember Carl Palmer, he says, because I was in a house band in a club in Liverpool, and he said Atomic Rooster came up to play. He was kind of a bit surprised that I knew Atomic Rooster. And he said, the thing was, he said, I wasn't taking much notice. And then I started listening to the drummer, this young guy. And he said, I just watched him and thought, oh my goodness, I've got to follow this guy who's sort of 20 years old. And he said, I did not like following on from him. So yeah, right out the gate, as they say, his style is kind of formed here as fast, quite furious at times, snare-centric, and it kind of drives the track. So he tends to be kind of pushing at the beat a bit. Again, I'll say more about that in the next episode. But there we go. That's the first two albums I wanted to mention, and then we'll go straight into Emerson, Lake and Palmer for the next installment. But this is the album, if anyone is a bit wanting to check out his kind of early roots and his early playing and some of the influences on his later work, Atomic Rooster is the band to check out. Okay, I'll speak to you soon with part 2.